Next, we've got Mike Puma. Come on up. Mike, yes. Mike is a partner at Preservation Studios, a full-service-based historic preservation consulting firm that works throughout the greater Northeast. He works directly with developers and architects to formulate comprehensive rehabilitation plans that conform to the Department of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. Mike is a preservationist in his private life as well, having purchased a dollar home from the city's demolition list, which is currently wrapping up a full rehabilitation, which I'm excited to see. Mike, he's also a former student of mine when he was here at the University of Buffalo, my first semester teaching here, and so I wanted to share just a quick little story because it also intersects with Paul Lang. So I mentioned that I took Paul's tour of Central Terminal last year, and at one point during the tour, he shared a story with great enthusiasm about this moment when, in 2011, one of their former board members discovered all the original drawings, plans, sections, elevations, details filed with the city for construction of the terminal. And I said, wait, is that Mike Puma? And he said, yeah. I said, Mike was my student. He found those drawings as part of my class. So it was a kind of a neat coincidence to hear that story shared after having that discovery years ago. So a nice connection there. But with that, welcome to Mike Puma.
I'm talking about the only non-Buffalo building, so I think maybe one person in the room might recognize this, all the way in the back. This is a building we're working on in Troy, New York. Believe it or not, it's an 1835 Greek revival. A lot of our buildings start out pretty. Some of them start out very ugly, and this is one of the ones on the ugly scale. It's the yellow one in the middle. So, as preservationists, we're trying to figure out what we're left with when bad things happen to good buildings. We peeled away the vinyl on a brick building and the enclosure on the cornice to find an original cornice, but clearly some terrible intervention happening on 3 floors in the first bay of this building. We were thankful to have that second floor oriel still intact, though. So now it comes down to, what the hell do we put back, because we aren't going off a lot. So thankfully, whatever was ripped off the first bay of this building was done after the building was painted, so we still have a little bit of physical evidence, these little wings at the top along the sides, and some discoloration on the cornice. So we're sort of getting an idea of what might have been here. We're sort of seeing that too on the first floor here. We've got those little wing ghost lines, and we see the same thing over here on the lintel above the doorway. So we knew this building was a lot more decorative, certainly not original to its Greek revival origins, but something that would have been an update to be fashionable later on in the era. So first thing we do is we start trying to understand the neighborhood context. These are the buildings immediately adjacent to this ruined row house. The building on the left, the red one, sort of gives us a good example. It's only got a 2-story feature, but the two on the right sort of start to get an understanding of, okay, if this is what we're seeing on the same block, everybody was trying to keep up with the Joneses, and then we sort of see other examples. These are modifications that happened to buildings in the early 19th century, built originally in the 19th century, but updated in the late Victorian period when people were doing upgrades, adding bay windows, getting really crazy as styles and changes in fashion changes, trending. Little word vomit there, sorry. But you get the idea, it was getting crazy. So once we start to understand the physical evidence and the contextual clues, I have fun with my crude drawing skills and come up with something that sort of rides the line between what might have been on the building without also being too elaborate, because when you're dealing with National Park Service standards, you can't get too crazy with it. So we come up with something a little bit simple that would have been working. If we're really lucky, we find a historic photo. The building we were working on is just to the left. This is usually what we get if we get anything, a partial shot, which is unfortunate because it's not enough to know what's going on. But if we're incredibly lucky, we get a much better photo. It was a long 20 seconds, like this one. Thankfully, there were 2 of these, so as you can see, it's hard to even figure that this is the same building, but that one with the massive 3-story oriel in the first bay is the same structure you saw on the first slide. And the buildings to the left of it are actually what it would have looked like when it was originally built as an 1835 Greek revival row house before all the Italianate changes came on. So working with the project architect, we are working with them in concert to come up with the design based on the photo, which was helpful, but not entirely clear. So taking some cues from the physical evidence we had on the front of the building, we knew that we had these cornices that terminated. We could figure out what the profile was. And thankfully, a lot of the profiles we were able to use were off-the-shelf stuff. And as butchered as the exterior was, the interior still had some gems to offer, like this fantastic window, which the upper half is actually hidden. It's taller on the outside. So decades worth of remodeling sort of makes for weird situations like this, but we were thankful to actually see original casing in this really great window on the inside, considering how terrible the outside was. But for all its faults, it still had a lot of understanding of how a row house works. This is the entry sequence when you get off the first into the first floor. That framing in the background is a borrowed light window into a former light well, and it is elaborate and as wonderful as this staircase is. It's not original to 1835. Back then, it would have been a lot more slender, non-turned balusters. But these things become important for saving. And I know it's black and it's not the best color scheme, but since it was painted, the client was able to keep it painted. I was pushing for bare wood, but they told me they were spending enough money on the place and they decided just to slap some paint on it, especially with some of the more expensive options happening outside the building. So this is sort of what we were dealing with on the inside. We've got a flat wall where the oriole was. You've got this terrible vinyl slider window, not a lot of natural daylight. It could be a hotel room on Transit Road that's undergoing rehab, not an 1835 row house in the middle of Troy, New York. Not really a great scene. This is the same room after. So I think most folks here would probably appreciate the after as their living room rather than before, but I can tell you, even though there's a fan in there, the cross breeze just sitting in that small projection, which is only like maybe 2 feet out or less, is absolutely amazing. And the amount of light it brings in and the way it frames the houses across the street is so different. And this is what we get after. It's not quite done, but it's getting there. As you can see on the top, the cornice over the oriole hasn't been reproduced yet. It's actually going to be produced here in Buffalo by Buffalo Plaster and Architectural Casting. So if anybody's never gone over to Gary's shop on Hinman, you have to. It's absolutely incredible. They even went so far as to replicate the door hood and fix some of the stuff on the second floor oriole. And all this is the same trim that you saw in that elevation drawing. It's pulling and riffing off of the other orioles we have on the street, so it vibes with the rest of the street, but it's also standard trim. So it kept costs down, it looks great, it all works together, it replicates the original design. The really expensive bit was those incredibly large custom milled brackets. But in preservation, we're often told that something is too far gone, or not important enough, or not worthy of being saved. And although we've had a long career in proving people otherwise, on a small scale, this has now become our de facto poster boy when people say that you can't save that building because this is a truly transformative project.